investigations. Thank you.
I call Tracy Martin.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to endorse the good work done by these officers. Particularly, the country is well served by the quality of the individuals who are involved in these offices, and we are pleased to see and endorse the increase in funding for the Officer of the Auditor-General, who every one of us that sits on a select committee will recognise the incredibly valuable work that they do by making sure that all members of this Parliament are well informed, that are given reasonable, logical recommendations and highlight areas for us that we should concentrate on when we go through checking the many different facets of the government departments, CRIs and so forth, that serve the New Zealand public with their money. So certainly New Zealand First has nothing but the highest regard for these officers. We also want to compliment the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. One could certainly not say that this Commissioner does not earn her weight when it comes to the amount of output that she provides for the New Zealand people and for this Parliament. And we would endorse many of the comments around the workload and the output of this very small agency, the Commissioner of the Environment, and the reports that, while we may not agree with all of the reports, are well-founded, well fleshed out, presented in a strong way, and the Commissioner always makes herself available. And that's the other thing. To caucuses, should they require it, she's more than happy to come and sit down and have a conversation about her reports and go through any concerns that we might have. So it's disappointing to see, with the amount of work that the Commission for the Environment releases, that she was unable to gain any more funding to support her and her team in this financial year. However, we acknowledge the comment by the Minister who opened that there was an indication that possibly that would happen in the next budget. I would like to spend the majority of my contribution, though, concentrating on the Office of the Ombudsman, and it's been reiterated again and again and again by other speakers about the importance of this office. And I think it's worthwhile noting that the Ombudsman has actually, the level of workload for this office has doubled since this government has come into office. Now, I think that's a very telling thing, Mr Speaker, that it's doubled over the majority of the last 10 years, which has been since this government's been in place, and they got 11,000 complaints were received in the 2013-2014 year. So it is good to see that their funding has been increased, that it's been recognised that their workload has increased and that they require more operations money to be able to deliver what is a vital overview of our democracy. It is unfortunate that all opposition parties have to report that it is very, very difficult and getting more difficult to actually gain answers through the appropriate channels from the government. It's very unfortunate that when a question is put down in writing, for example, here's an example, sir. Recently, New Zealand First asked for a report, quite appropriately asked for a report from the Ministry of Education. And a written response came from the Ministry of Education that says that she declines to release the report to New Zealand First because at some stage in the future it'll be made public. At some stage in the future it will be made public. Mr Barclay says, fair enough. I asked the New Zealand public to just acknowledge that Mr Barclay believes that that's an appropriate answer when members of this House who are here to represent the New Zealand public request information about things that are being done to or happening with the New Zealand public, that some stage in the future Mr Barclay could well be dead by the time that the Ministry of Education then releases, under the Minister's instruction, this report about things that are happening with New Zealanders' money and to New Zealanders. But Mr Barclay thinks that that's appropriate. Well, there you go, just tick that one away. And I think the other thing too, I want to acknowledge Mr Hipkins' contribution around charter schools, because I know New Zealand, there was a lot of conversation. And no, and Mr Hipkins is correct, charter schools are not open to the OIA. And again, Mr Hipkins articulated that the reason given at that time was that OIAs could be sent to the ministry and therefore that information would be open, and then the Ombudsman, if you couldn't get it that way, could go and follow up with the ministry. However, I do want to make sure that it's on the record that the Ombudsman's workload has increased around when charter schools were opened, because New Zealand First was able to put into that legislation at Select Committee stage the fact that under the discipline processes in a charter school, the Ombudsman still is the final port of call. And I don't know how many members of the New Zealand public, or even how many members of this Parliament, understand that under the discipline processes inside the Education Act 1989, charter schools are still open to the overview of the Ombudsman. And so anybody who has been refused entry to a charter school, anybody who has been pushed out the back door of a charter school, anybody with a special need who has not been catered for inside a charter school can and should complain to the Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman can then pursue that complaint with that charter school, with the sponsor of that charter school directly. So that legislation did create more work inside that one little piece of that legislation for the Ombudsman downstream. And it would be interesting to get answers to those questions, if one could get answers to those questions about the number of complaints that were actually put forward. But you might be waiting until Mr. Barclay's passed away before you get that out of the Minister's office. I think what the other reason that indicates how important the office is that when the Chief Ombudsman actually identified how many complaints they were getting around certain government departments and said that she was going to undertake a formal investigation, that suddenly the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment undertook its own review of itself. And it was particularly around the processing of temporary visa partnership applications by Immigration New Zealand. So rather than have the Ombudsman go and do a full investigation, the Ministry decided to review itself. And the result of their internal review was that of 1,155 affected complainants and other potentially affected people, 258 had their applications approved, but 676 applications got a refund. So this is how important the Office of the Ombudsman and how its funding must continue and must be maintained at a level that they can adequately do their work. The Green member, Eugenie Sage, mentioned 176 cases were unable to be pursued because of the previous level of funding. It had been even worse than that. 300 cases, the Chief Ombudsman had mentioned that she had been unable to seriously investigate because she did not have the funding, she did not have the resources to do so. So all New Zealand First can say is that we, like the Labour Party and the Green Party, endorse the incredibly important work. We're saddened that still at this stage we haven't been able to put an appropriation in place to the level that the Chief Ombudsman says that she requires to truly deliver what we believe is an important role. And before I sit, Mr. Speaker, for just another indication of the incredible workload of the Ombudsman and how it affects this Parliament, New Zealand First lodged a complaint with the Office of the Ombudsman last year. And the last letter we received around that complaint from last year was dated 18th of June 2014. Now, we know that the Ombudsman takes her role very seriously, and their officers don't just let things lie because they have no political value in it. They are there to make sure that we all do our jobs properly. So we can only assume that we have not received any further communication around this complaint because the office is overloaded. So again, we certainly endorse the work done by the people and the officers that are here. We endorse the small increments that have been given here to their funding, but we would implore the government to, rather than avoid passing out information and creating more workload for the officers of the Ombudsman where they wouldn't need any more money to do it, let's just answer questions, let's just try and be professional as we move forward, shall we? And then perhaps we wouldn't need to fight for more funding next time. Kia ora.
I call Dr. Megan Woods.
Mr.